corporate America right now. The passive aggressive bullshit on a day in and day out basis, the territorialism, and it's these like minor infractions, but they're happening on a pretty consistent basis. If you can have an environment where people are more comfortable being themselves and having an understanding as to who is around them, you're teaching people how to be conductors in symphonies. There are 10,000 people that are going to change the world remarkably over the next 30 years. Those 10,000 people are... I plan on disrupting the LinkedIn space in a fun way. I'll probably blackball myself from corporate America, but...
Being an exec, being a dad, being a husband, being a son.
Book is being written right now
Oh,
from
wow.
a deal that cracked last year.
Congratulations,
Thank
man.
you. Thank you. That's an intense process in itself.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
But what a freaking gift, man. How are you doing?
We're maintaining, man. We're like trying to juggle a bunch of different things. I'm probably not as busy as you. I mean, you're a father as well, so
Yeah.
that's a whole different set of responsibilities. He just got a book deal.
I know.
Yeah.
Something in Fine. What is it? What's the company? Something in Fine. Fine and
Park and Fine is my agency.
uh-huh.
The
Right.
deal was through DK, which is a subsidiary of Penguin.
Okay.
Nice.
So a deal here in the US, a deal in the UK that extends to Australia, and a Spanish language version already,
Amazing.
which is nuts all around. It's one of those and like the first pieces of that are starting to hit now relative to like the first, okay, cool, you actually submitted the first piece on time. Like that unleashes part of like what the overall deal was. But all these things are happening concurrently. So I'm like, I have to just be, it's funny, with more happening, it's helping me be more present because I can't, it's so much that it's like my brain has shut down the like too much coming in from the outside when I'm not like, where am I and what am I focused on right now?
Yeah.
And that's actually created like a remarkable amount of clarity across the board, which has helped because I think otherwise it almost feels comical. It's like there's no way. Like sometimes I'll put TikToks together and I'm like, there's no way yesterday was actually yesterday.
Yeah.
Like that seems fictitious, almost like a cheesy movie to a certain extent of like, there's no way that series of events like actually happened like that. So I just try to roll with it.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
I saw that. I just listened to a podcast where you said, I have 3 jobs.
Yeah.
You work your day job, your corporate gig.
Yep.
You are a creator for Night.
Yep.
And then you also work for Park and Fine.
Yep.
And then I guess, so the Park and Fine, that's an agency I
Yep.
wasn't familiar with, but you just got your book deal.
Yeah.
Or you probably had your book deal, but you just delivered the first part of that.
Correct. Yeah. The deal hit. They signed me up last spring. We took almost all of last year to build the proposal, which is a pretty intense process. And all this is brand new to me, right? Like I'd never like gotten into, and it was literally through a podcast with another creator. And I started to ask her questions about her book deal. And I just kind of learned and followed the popcorn trail. Hey, I've got some ideas. Where does this go? So last year was signing with Park and Fine, coming up with the proposal, shopping that around, figuring out what the right deal was, locking that in, and now it's like off to the races. Full book is due September 1st.
Wow.
And
So it's slated to release next year.
Slated to release next year.
Wow.
Can you talk about what the book's going to be about?
Yeah, 1000%. It's called How to Get Addicted to Appreciation.
Okay.
And I've got like a very specific, basically decision tree that can help anybody figure out whether or not they can appreciate something. With the theory being the more that you can appreciate holistically, you're going to create this fundamental base layer for your soul on a day in and day out basis that's just going to change your perception of the world, literally.
Fascinating.
But in a very subtle way where you're not like, oh my God, I need to be blown away by all these things. But just like, I can relax a little bit. I can, instead of seeing what I might have seen in a moment of consternation or even in a moment of joy, I'm going to see it just slightly differently. And as that starts to compound, the rest is going to unlock these levels of understanding in regards to how things work, so that when I figure out what the hell I want to do with my life, which a lot of people is obviously an ongoing journey, you can create this clarity between, I've got this fundamental understanding of appreciation. Now I'm able to see how that works, like as it compounds. And then on top of that, I can tie the two together to really kind of unlock full potential in oneself. But it will be written in a way that is like easy to digest. Like I'm not a huge book nerd myself. Like Catcher in the Rye is arguably the most impressionable book I've ever read. So it's going to be written very like conversationally, and hopefully I know people will be able to put it down and be like, that's not overwhelming. Like I don't feel like I've got a huge to-do list now. Like I can just like, oh wow, like this label actually looks different. I can kind of follow that popcorn trail and be like, that's why I have appreciation for this label and how it came to be and where the adhesive might have come from and what the process is to go through to print this out and how it impacts the workflow that made this salad, etc. So
we also are signed to an agency for our book. We just haven't had a chance to prioritize that entire process.
Yep.
But one of the things that ends up happening is you have to figure out how to essentially come up with a comp, right, for something that doesn't exist. Because the way that they sell things is they're going to say, this is like this, but like this, right?
Right.
So the way you describe your book, and let me know if this is a fair assessment or not, is it the books that come to mind? Actually, what are the books that come to mind if you had to do this? Yeah. For me, it's probably
like what would be the Amazon recommended?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of like the subtle art of someone that's reading like the subtle art of not giving a fuck to like,
Tim Ferriss joint.
No, I don't know. No, I think it's more like I don't know if it's Dan Harris, but like a 10% happier, like just an awareness and an appreciation, right?
Totally. Yeah. It's in that ballpark. Atomic Habits a little bit as well. Because it's those very simple nuances of, if you're going to want to play guitar, leave it in the middle of the room so you can't avoid it kind of things. Like they're from a thought process perspective. My desired outcome is somebody's going to look at a packed subway and instead of being like, fuck, I can't believe like it's going to be slow, like, or whatever it is, and think, wow, I wonder what the total weight is that's on that thing. And isn't it remarkable, and kind of go down that popcorn trail to how cool it is we even have the thoughtfulness to dig up the streets, God knows how long ago, and start to put the subway systems in. And that that's not going to be a force. That's the key, that the entire premise is not a force. It's something that you can just like implant in your head and you start to see it differently. It was really cool going through the process of building the proposal. The people in Park and Fine, this one incredible woman named Mia in particular had this story where she was on a trip with her friend and they were in a car somewhere in Colorado, and she's like, hey, can I say something weird? She's like, yeah, sure. She's like, isn't it cool how all of the road signs on interstates are the same? And her friend was like, yeah, sure. But like, she was like, well, think about that. Like they're literally same color, same font, same size. Like it just makes sense. It's so much easier. It's so cool that people like that was something that was thought through and the broader impact that has. Yeah. And her friend's like, yeah, no, that makes sense. And she was like, holy shit, it's Tim's proposal. Like I connected those dots because I was seeing things in this different light, and it made me even look at a sign on a highway and be like, oh, I can kind of appreciate the origin and the thoughtfulness that went into that. And it's interesting too, because it's like a mix of the corporate side and how I have to think through like all of these bigger problems and processes and how it ties back to a 100,000 person company and all that kind of good stuff. But also like the dumbass, like stoner mentality side of mine, where it's like, that's cool, man. Like it's like a little Spicoli mixed with, if you get that old Fast Times at Ridgemont High reference.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
It's like, a little bit of Spicoli mixed with like a little bit of Steve Jobs, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think actually setting the proper context for this conversation, it's really funny. When we met because you guys were just creators in New York that appreciated each other's work. And
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The stuff that you were doing, I saw exactly what you described. The ability to not only, and please dig in if you want. Not only, be someone that's creative, but also someone that's obviously connected to like the business and the analysis and the strategy part of it. Yeah. And actually what's really, really funny, just to contextualize how similar we're thinking. So Andrew Pelosi is a day one. He and I used to work together.
Oh, no way.
Ezra too.
No way.
Yeah, I'm one of those Maker Studio guys.
Okay.
So when Andrew was here visiting and we had dinner and he's like, oh, I'm thinking about working with Timm, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, so it makes so much sense. All of it sort of coming together. But yeah, so knowing that, I think on both sides, that's why I'm more interested. And I know we didn't get a pre-pro call like we normally do with the producers, but like, yeah, man. I mean, we're here to help. Anything that we could be helpful for. I saw a couple of questions that you had, and then my questions for you are like, yeah, I want to know what the 10-year vision is, right? I see a lot of different aspects. Whether you want to continue down the path of being a corporate thought leader, or someone helming that ship, or someone just being creative. Yeah.
I mean, it's so funny because like part of my brain immediately goes to the crazy end of the spectrum. What the crazy end of the spectrum is for me, and I've said this to Brooklyn, who's on Andrew's team, and who I work with, probably closest on a day in and day out basis. I'm like, I want to be the first night creator that wins an Oscar.
Oh, interesting.
So you want to make movies?
I would long form that's kind of the core of where the rest of this come from. It's actually somewhat hilarious to me that I've been able to make short form work because I'm genuinely long-winded by nature. I see, music videos strung together that make 90-minute sequences in my head.
Okay.
And, my mom, for better or worse, was like, cool, you're 6 years old. Here's a 1979 Woody Allen movie that we can watch together, kind of stuff. Yeah. That wasn't like super inappropriate, but definitely aggressive for like a younger kid to wrap their head around. Things like.
Which movie was it?
Sleeper.
Oh wow.
Yeah, which is hilarious. I mean, it's a fantastic movie. Yeah. Manhattan came a little bit later, but like those were kind of core memory movies for me. That Cheech and Chong as well, which is super hilarious in hindsight. But she was the kind of mom that would like teach me the history of rock and roll and that kind of stuff to make sure that like I knew the origin of the music that I loved. So anyway, with that big picture, super crazy 10-year vision, first night creator to win an Oscar.
You want to star in it?
I would love to write it, have some sort of directorial or executive producer role, but just whatever it takes to get the thing that I can see in my head to a big screen, and knowing how I can see that coming to fruition and knowing what I think is going to attract an audience now that I've learned as much as I have. Yeah. That's part of the 10-year goal.
I see it. So you're pitching a story that reminds me of a Michel Gondry to A24 or a Wes Anderson to an A24 or an Indian Paintbrush.
Yep.
And it's going to be something about, some observation. Is this what it is?
Yes. Well, it is the last 10 years have been hilarious for me. It's been excruciating in some moments, and it's also been the most exhilarating and opportunistic time of my life. And it all starts with this amazing backdrop of how local businesses get on TV, right? Which is part of what connected us and kind of the broader, connective tissue for why people love New York in general, but also why people, regardless of how crazy the state of our country might be, can still romanticize America to a certain extent in regards to, the American dream of having your own business and, Franklin barbecue in Texas, assuming that's a real place, and like the origins of people just having a vision and wherever they come from and bringing that to life, right? So my corporate journey, especially over the last 11 years when I've got it put into like a real executive level role, was basically reinventing the way that small businesses could get commercials and have them put on TV. And that backdrop alone is hilarious because you think about those types of spots, but there's no real like stories of like, well, who makes those? Are those agencies? Do the businesses make themselves? My team's done 20,000 pieces of creative consistently over the past 10 years. And like cable companies or ours in particular has figured this out at scale because you can't sell local advertising on TV unless the businesses have commercials. So just that is kind of like an underlying theme throughout the course of a movie, right? There's kind of like the characters and what happens and how things evolve and how you come up. But like there's always some sort of, well, what is it based on? Is it based in a small town here? Is it based on base life in baseball, etc.? Based on how small businesses get commercials on TV. And because it's such an interesting part of the advertising space that nobody talks about, is like part of what's in my head. And then let alone, the things that I think people can relate to, even if they've never been in the shoes of being 35 and getting your first big job, having a kid, still having some growing pains that you need to work around relative to work-life balance and how you're working those dynamics, potentially losing your soul in a corporate environment. And how do you deal with those struggles? Seeing things at a next level in a work environment, and then how you question the state of the world and why are we actually like this, with things like a merger happening and having a team having to fire 100 people and start a department from scratch. So whether it's one 90-minute film or several seasons broken up into episodes, that's ballpark kind of what's in my head.
I love it. And then there's also the backdrop of what's happening in the overall landscape of the industry itself.
Yes, exactly. Right? Especially as things evolve to being in a more digital space, and then, if it goes the way it goes in my head, there's like a final concluding chapter of like pandemic, technology picking up, things at greater scale, finding harmony, but then how all the worlds kind of like, then wrap themselves together in a nice cohesive state.
And we could take this out, but I'm genuinely interested. Your job and what you're tasked to do right now.
Yep.
If I zoom out, is actually just a microcosm of what every business is going to have to do with or without the distribution of cable.
Oh yeah.
Right.
What, to be able to figure out ways to get creative into businesses' hands so that they can advertise themselves?
It's how to tell the story.
Yep.
And how to use the tools to tell the story.
Yep.
And to do that in an efficient way, and that maximizes speed and is cost effective, right?
1,000%.
Right. So like at the end of the day, what used to be a $2 million spot that you'd have to hire BBDO to do.
Yep.
And would yield a certain result.
Yeah.
The genius of what you're working on right now is, okay, I can make that entire thing happen for I'm gonna guess like $5,000, which is or $20. I don't know what the number is, and I don't know what the scale is.
That's at the higher end.
Really? Okay. Yeah. Exactly.
We've got a tool now. I've been working on this in the AI space since 2017. Wasn't smart enough to know like, oh, this is the future of AI. It was just like, this makes sense. This is the problem I have to solve for, because there's the scale factor, right? And even at 20,000 commercials a year, there's 3 million small businesses just in our footprint alone. So how do you make it as accessible as humanly possible for everybody? You can't send a crew out to every single business. But what you can do is create, this was almost like ahead of the Canva times. And there's this tool that I'm happy to say out loud, and this can 1,000% stay in. A tool called Waymark that we partnered with this company called Waymark to develop, where now, as it evolved, you just have to go in and put in a business's website, and it's going to build you a commercial that's literally broadcast quality ready and probably 80% done in 90 seconds, including a voiceover. And then you can kind of tweak things from there on a pretty easy user interface. Yeah. So that, because TV and streaming are basically the same thing now, right? A lot of people are getting their traditional cable subscriptions through streaming devices anyway.
Yeah.
Streaming apps are massive, especially in the MVPD space. So, you're right. Like this is something that's necessary, and people need the tools, and like a lot, especially from a small business perspective, as y'all know super well, like they're not marketers by nature, and the advertising space can be extraordinarily confusing. And they're like, what do I do? Where do I put my dollars? Like, well, I don't have advertising dollars, but I just spent $5,000 on balloons and postcards
or mailers.
Right. Exactly. Right. So, that's what's made the job so enjoyable, like genuinely enjoyable. It's the people that are like, cool, I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas, and I want to do something creative in this community. I love videography and storytelling, etc. And of all the places to be able to create a sustainable, like comfortable living for those types of people spread out across the country is the cable companies, or at least our cable company in particular.
What's the effective, like, not RPM, but like, what's the CPM for something like that? Typically, is there an average?
I'll put it this way. You can have a very nice TV campaign for $5,000.
Okay.
And it's obviously going to scale.
Yeah.
But
and who owns the asset, by the way? Can the business take it and run it on social?
Yeah, totally. I've always been a firm believer, and for what I can control, the easier you can make it for businesses to develop and own their own creative, the more likely you are that when it comes time to make a media decision, they're going to look at you and be like, cool, you helped enable this. And if you put any kind of constrictions around it, it's just going to make the relationship a little less sticky. You want to be seen as a source of opportunity. And I think even if you're not saying that, just being like, yeah, cool, come make the spot. Do what you want to do with it? We think that you'll see a lot of benefits of being like that TV famous new joint that just opened up down the block. And people would be like, because that happens, right? Like people have become renowned in that's why we know a lot of the lawyers that we know from TV and like old school things like Ferrari driving school and Cars for Kids and it works. So, trying to make it accessible and fun too with that, like be TV famous. You can own your neighborhood. You don't have to own the country or even the whole city. You can just own your neighborhood.
For sure. So that's one of those things that I don't think it'll ever go away, right? Like Selena, like all those commercials that you talk about, or even Subway ads. Like when it comes to media, there will always be certain platforms that reach certain audiences, and like you can't even underestimate it. But I have a buddy who does fast channels, and they literally just do country, like you know what I mean, like country westerns.
Yep.
And whether it's on in a dentist's office somewhere or on in someone's home and just on like those are real impressions and it makes an impact, right? But I say that to say those aren't growing industries, right? So that's almost like how we view the theater or Broadway, right? What do you think is the new like what's the TikTok of your thing? Where do you think TV is going? Where do you think all of this stuff is going?
It's all going to get blurred together through a single box that connects to your TV. And you're going to either choose to watch that on your TV or through your device.
Or through Neuralink.
Yeah.
Or through
through a chip.
Just visualize it in your head.
No, I mean, they're probably not. I mean, especially now with the latest Apple products. Like,
do you watch TV at home?
I don't.
Yeah. I'm going to go on a limb and say your daughter doesn't watch TV at home.
They do. They're really into Gilmore Girls right now, which is dope. To like, I hear it from the other room. Only reason why I don't watch TV, I mean, I'll watch like
you don't have time.
It's it's a specific choice of when it's TV time. I got the laptop out. I'm getting ready for the next day. I'm trying to do a rough cut. I'm writing a little bit of the book, etc. But I mean, sports not as often as I would like, but. Sports would be primary, and I do kind of miss just letting myself soak in something, whether it's a series or a movie. It's been a long ass time at this point because I was doing this even before I started making content because of how crazy the job was out of the gate. But I missed that. But yeah, my daughter is a YouTube kid for sure. Like, and she's got her favorite creators, which has been dope and actually really helpful throughout this entire journey.
Who are some of her favorite creators?
Preston Plays is probably number one. Huge Minecrafter, loves that. Sophia Nygaard is starting to pop up a little bit, from like just like an interesting concoction.
Your colleagues.
So Preston, it was funny. We became friends through LinkedIn of all places.
Right.
We're like, this guy named Preston starts following me on LinkedIn, or I got a connection request. I'm like, is this the same? I was like, holy shit. And that actually turned out to be an incredible. He's a really good dude in general, but also to have that pull with my daughter was amazing. We got he was super kind when he came in for a Lego event, and just like a pro all around. It's also really cool to watch him in real life interacting with his fans. Like that was like a pros pro moment in regards to how you do that the right way, especially when there's cameras on and you're kind of like cognizant.
What were some of the stuff that you took away from that?
The interaction in regards to engaging the other person and how well that can be done in a very systematic, sounds probably harsh, but thoughtful is probably the better way to put it. What is the other person's energy? And I was watching Preston do this in real time, and it was so dope to see, because it's like, this is professional. This isn't like a character or somebody that has some sort of like, just this is their overall exuberance. There is a very, at least from what I'm getting inside his head now, recognition of where the kid's energy was, shyness, excitement level, where their eyes were going, to ask questions to get them to be more comfortable and engaged and happier and more present in the moment, because that can be super overwhelming, especially considering, at least for that event, I mean, the kids probably range from, 8 to 15, 16, if I had to guess. And to see, especially from what I saw from an engagement perspective, and also like the time allowance as well, to be able to have something that felt like, as I'm watching this, I'm like, he's making a real connection with this kid. That kid, especially from a high-level brand awareness perspective, that kid is going to be a fan for life. Doesn't matter what Preston does after this, that kid is never going to forget this experience. And he would do it on a very like organic, but also specific level. And then, but also would have the cognizant of be like, okay, cool. Now, let me engage with somebody else now, but also have that kind of segue happen in an organic way, while at the same time too, keeping his presence and energy level up so that anybody that was watching around could also pull from it. And it was just fun to watch, because the more I'm exposed to this, I've started my career in ABC Sports production. So like I've seen Mike Tirico and Nick Faldo and,
so
some
like
of the
athletes.
I've seen like athletes and the sports side of things on both sides of the camera. The creator side is different for a multitude of reasons, 100%. But there's still like enough similarities where it makes sense. But as you digest it and you see how people approach a space, for me, I'm like always taking mental notes across the board.
Right.
And that was pretty dope to watch in real time, because it's an audience that I don't really engage with intentionally through my channel.
Right.
And to then on top of all that, to see my daughter get to have that experience and to see how well he interacted with her, but to also know that that was just like a communal thing that he was able to do that well. It was like, that is why you have the subscriber count that you do. It's because of how you connect those dots. People can sit behind cameras and do things in certain ways, but I think it's a very special mindset that's able to scale that with the understanding in regards to where the other person is and meeting them there, especially when you can do that with kids.
Yeah. Do you think that that's a skill that you can work and build up, or is that something that's just, you're born with?
Totally a skill. I like to hope it is, because I tell myself that for a lot of stuff. I'm not smart enough or talented enough to know that inherently, but I think attitude is a skill. And that was a combination of attitudinal behaviors on top of engagement with an audience of 1, 5, 10 million, whatever that is. And combining those together, I think 1,000%. If you are curious enough and have a desire to do it, and you're willing to look at it like a golf swing, where it's like, some of these little adjustments are going to feel really annoying. And at first I'm going to be like, this doesn't feel right. The club's going to fall out of my hands as soon as I take a backswing or whatever. If we can look at that type of engagement, that type of interaction in a similar capacity, then I think you could turn yourself into a rocket ship if you wanted to.
Yeah, I love that you took that away, because that's specific. One of your questions on the pre-pro was like, how analytical or how strategic are we about like anything, whether it's planning, whether it's producing, whether it's diving into our analytics. We're very methodical and we try to be thoughtful with everything.
Yep.
And that skill that you talked about is actually something that we're very thoughtful of. So then, and we actually try to break it down into like, so why does that happen? Okay, number one, a skill that we see, and I've seen it from athletes to literally like, network studio heads to athletes to, musicians, right? The people that we've been exposed to like financiers of the world, right? And it's just like, okay, number one, they're genuinely curious people.
Inquisitive.
Yeah.
They're inquisitive, right?
Inquisitivity is key.
So
I love that.
So one thing is they're always asking you a question. They're going to say, like, it's so funny. They'll say, hey, Tim, what kind of shoes are those? I know you're sneakerhead, right? It's like, hey, what are those? Right? Or they'll say, oh, dude, I love your jacket. So they're always scanning and they're very curious. So it's like, and I think that curiosity actually, people are completely different and have a different reaction and sort of an experience with you if they know from the get that you're genuinely interested.
Yep.
Instead of trying to be interesting.
Yeah.
They're already fans of Preston, right?
Yeah.
But like when he's there, he's like, hey, so you know what I mean?
Yep.
They're interested.
Yep.
So like that's the first thing. Second thing is, and I think you described it with Preston, it's a fluency, right? It's a fluency to match the room or the person that you're talking to, right? So it's like if the energy is a little tense, then like, okay, cool. If the energy is really up, okay, cool. Like, you know what I mean? It's just being able to navigate those spaces. And that's when, even a few years ago when we first met, I was like, man, that's what really resonated like with the content that you make. I mean, you're literally a dad. I'm in corporate America in those boardrooms. I'm also making content every single day. So then there's like all those things. I think there's a world-class fluency there. And that's why I think your content resonates with so many different people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny. The curiosity thing is always like something I was not able to shut off. And to an extent where I get curious about what was the purchase, like where was the moment where you decided that hat? Right. And so sometimes I almost get tripped up on myself because like my curiosity will jump to a level where I'm like, I need to slow down the chain of questioning, but like that's having that kind of always there. So I think to a certain extent, kind of going back to what you said about like what's inherent and what is learned. So I think you can have inherent traits like that, but then also refine them along the way where I didn't, was not cognizant that curiosity would have that type of power to it. Remember when I started my first job at ABC Sports, it was like everybody goes in and you start to get trained on this because like you're off to the races and then you're going and producing live sports within the blink of an eye. So like what's the onboarding process was like very much kind of a boot camp for live sports production. And in that, the guy that was running it was like, there will be one winner coming out of this and it's who asks the most questions. And literally had like a contest over the first 48 hours. And usually I'm the quiet observer because I have the questions, but like I'll go from, that's cool hat. Tell me about that too. Thinking of you standing there either online or in the store with the selection that you might have had and being like, I wonder what it was and what else the choices were. And I can look at especially you ride the subway and you look around and you're just like, it's overwhelming. And so it's kind of fun to learn and try to get smarter over the years to refine that down to where it's going to be at the other person's level, energy-wise, comfort level-wise, etc. Because then you can start to have some fascinating conversations overall. Plus, as a genuine introvert by nature, my wife would corroborate that, it's easier for me in public settings to just ask more questions, especially if it's like I'm at some sort of event that I'm not comfortable being at to begin with. I got stuck in this conversation or in this corner. I'm already anxious about what I need to do next because I got work or I've got blah, 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 blah. The easiest way for me to put myself out of the anxious spot and to try to make the most of it is to just ask questions. Because then you get the other person talking a lot and then I can distract my brain by being like, okay, what's the right follow-up question to ask? And especially in business settings, because I'm not super like, said, hey, you want to go to this, with all due respect, like addressable advertising conference or event or blah, blah, blah. I'm gonna be like, do I have to from a work perspective? But like, it's so funny. I'm now that much more comfortable in my creator setting. So that curiosity has also helped relative to just finding my own way to a certain extent and getting more comfortable with being in positions where I wasn't initially comfortable. So I think that skill set overall has like such a wide variety of potential opportunities for individuals if you can harness it the right way, or at least grow with it.
As someone that is constantly having to answer questions for others because of how many people like work with you and for you and around you, who do you ask questions to? One of the challenges that we have, especially as you get older and you get put on a perch, whether by design or not, is you get a lot of your feedback loop. It's an echo chamber, right? But we always try to surround ourselves with things we don't know. So we always try to ask young people, like Sam or whoever, right? So who do you ask?
So it depends on, so the first part, the way you teed that up was like at least I heard mostly like from a business perspective, right? So I'll start there. One of the first things I learned getting into a big role right out of the gate, it was a 100-person team, ballooned to 270 after the merger, was feeling like I had to solve everyone's problems all the time. So if they were like, do we have a handbook? Do we, what's the process for this? What do we do when the client asks for that? And you're like, I'm the boss, I have to fix everything. You will crash into a wall super fast if you try to answer all of those questions for other people. So what's your recommendation? Saying it like that empowers people, then allows for that dynamic of what is the other perspective? How are you learning from other people on a consistent basis? Makes that sustainable for you as a leader. Doesn't put the pressure on you to have to figure everything out. Could create a more inclusive culture holistically within a department. And it also means you're problem solving from multiple angles on a consistent basis. Because I can take the perspective and be like, that's cool. That actually makes me think of this other idea, or we may never do that, or whatever the outcome might be. But that's why I say them when it comes to who am I asking questions, because even the person that's been there for 2 weeks, their experience with the onboarding process could unlock something that's going to make the entire department better in 2 months. So that's on the work side of things. When it comes to that 360 surrounding of what are we learning from, where are we learning? I would say it's kind of everybody, right? I mean, I certainly have some go-to friends for very specific and intentional questions. But the more I can learn and observe, and even from people that I may not interact with, I might have a question about storytelling and consistency and the ability to be really smart about engagement throughout the course of a longer journey relative to a creator. I'm going to look at Victoria Paris for the person that can answer that for me. Even if I'm not going to have the conversation with her directly, I'm going to want to learn from what she's actually doing. And I think the answers are there when we lean in a little bit, because my day-to-day like surroundings is kind of small, right? Like I interact with my family, interact with the people that I work with, interact with comments. It's grown. So if I'm in a pickle mentally, I'm probably going to call somebody like Old Time Hockey, or Caleb Simpson has been a friend that is hard for me to describe how helpful he has been throughout this for a couple of different reasons. One, because of how he invited me in to his world before he did his first apartment tour, and just that like almost in a similar way in regards to like feeling accepted when you and I connected,
right? And
how that can change, especially for the guy that feels like, I dropped in out of the clear blue sky in a suit, 20 years older than everybody else, and I'm like, I'm an alien here. And so to find creative common ground, in addition to the way that we discussed, like, where's the business evolving relative to brand deals and storytelling and the engagement with sports, like, that's good for the soul. And there's not a single person I've come across that hasn't helped me in some capacity on that journey. Caleb in particular, for a couple of different reasons, both from timing of like when he might have been at my house for dinner or other conversations, or just kind of like general thoughtfulness when you don't know that you need your friend to say that thing to you at that moment, or they didn't know 1,000% that you needed to get that text message or that DM at that moment. And even if it was just like, hey, when's your next run kind of thing, when you're like, oh, somebody was thinking about that or somebody wants to spend time. And again, because my world is on a day-to-day basis is relatively small with my wife and my daughter and then the people around me. So I try to be smart about understanding who is in my life and how lucky I am for each one of them. Because I think the deeper understanding of like the luck and the appreciation for each of them individually creates more of a Rolodex of like what my mom can do on any given day and where I might need that help, where I might need to engage with my dad on a specific topic based on his background, or even things where I'm like, oh, I never would have thought that he would have had this 2 cents. Above all else, Kelly Jane.
Yep.
You know, she's my friggin' rock on a day in and day out basis. And it's kind of nuts. I mean, especially being married with a kid and getting into this. I mean, can you imagine how goofy some of those conversations were in the early days of like, you know, I just need another 20 minutes to do a voiceover, babe. Or like, you know, hey, I got invited to go on this podcast with this 25-year-old female creator that's like, you know, and she goes to her page and she's like, what the fuck is this? Right. Yeah. Like, so the true encouragement and then the ability to be like, what do you think of this post?
Yeah.
You know, what do you think of the engagement? Like, and all of the things. So she's number one above all else.
Yeah. What's your daughter think about all of it?
She is, because she's a YouTube kid, it's helped a tremendous amount. Because I think that there's a recognition of, oh, there are families that do this. So we're not so weird. Exactly. Yeah, sure. Exactly. She's comfortable with it because she not only sees it happening, but she sees some of the journey as well.
Yeah.
And that it's consistent. It's not like, especially for the people that she watches the most, seem to have usually high subscriber counts, which makes sense that she's gravitating towards the content that a lot of other kids are gravitating towards. But at the same time too, I'm trying to be more and more conscientious of, she's 11, she's going to be 12, she's going to be 13. I need to be that much more cognizant. And by the default of how my brain works, I want to be in a position where she doesn't have to remind me about what's going to make her comfortable or uncomfortable, that I can default to, I'm not going to bother you with this, or I'm not going to ask you, because everything that I shoot, hence like, you know, the slight interruption there of like, you know, busting it out, like everything I do is kind of grab and go.
Yeah. There's
very few times, unless like the phone falls over and I'm like, okay, can we take one more sip of the tequila shot or something, just so, but even in those cases, that's like 1 in 100 that I'm trying to like replicate something. So just being conscientious of that, I think, will be helpful. But this is the best answer I can give you. This morning, I was taking her to school. We're on a bike, and I forget how I was plotting. You know, we have active discussions about where is this all going? How long can I sustain a full-time job while doing all these things? Yeah. And she is genuinely excited for me to pick her up more from school. And she's like, oh, and then if that happens and this, she's like, and then you'll be picking me up a lot more from school. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like that. So it's the understanding, it's the awareness, and it's the encouragement, both in being an active participant when she wants to be, which is more often than not, she's kind of cool with it because she sees what it does and like it understands and is cool with it. But then also the encouragement to be like, even if she has no deep understanding of like what it would take to get to that place, that if the outcome means you're home more often because you've done other things and you've become more of a full-time creator, for lack of a better description, and that means that you pick me up more from school, then that's cool. And so I really couldn't ask more from an 11-year-old to pull and understand and then encourage as well.
Word.
That's awesome.
So do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, how can we be helpful?
So here's my biggest conundrum in the space right now. I don't know what I'm posting today. I don't know what I'm posting tomorrow. That's a problem. To me, that's a problem, because I will sit there in the morning and I'm like, fuck, you know, especially, and I know as well scheduled as my days are, because I've always put making content last, goes underneath work and family. it's gotten a lot more real recently when there's more brand deals and now I'm right, like all of those things. But the organic content is what got us here. Being smarter about that is my biggest challenge, and my brain is just like nonstop ideas. So I'm like squirrel with ideas. So I'm like, oh, cool. I could do a book of appreciation post about your cup because an idea just popped to mind. Let me start that. And then like I'm distracted by something else. I'm like, ooh, let me do that. So I'll sit there at 5 o'clock in the morning with my laptop and I'm like, I'll drop in the timeline of yesterday and I'll kind of go into a usual vlog style. That's probably why I've done mostly like quote vlog content, because at least for me, it's the most brainless approach. You capture things and the next morning I sit there and I drop it into a timeline. I make up a voiceover off the top of my head and hopefully I can get all that done in 45 minutes and then be out the door to go for a run. Strategically, like how do y'all think about, whether it's explicitly based on what you know about me or in general, like what a good content strategy is? I like feel like I have zero strategy right now other than run and gun. So like your thoughts in that space and how you wrap your head around knowing what the hell am I posting next Tuesday? To me, it feels like I'm just hydroplaning through all of this.
Yeah, I think you're in a really interesting case in two ways. Number one, you have a corporate background, and our approach to programming is very corporate. We have an annual offsite. We do monthly check-ins. We have certain OKRs and KPIs for the month.
Wow.
Both from a viewership standpoint, from an engagement standpoint, from an output standpoint. So like you have all of those skills already. And I think it's just a matter of you prioritizing and making, instead of the work logo being the number one priority, it's essentially your brand being the number one priority. So I think that's really interesting. The second thing is, in that content business, not many people can get to where you are, which is people are following you for you, right? So, and this typically happens with like vloggers, and I've heard the other, like, people say you're, when I first saw you, I'm like, oh, this is like Casey, but for TikTok, right?
Yeah.
Or Emma, like for TikTok, right? And I think that's a tremendous place to be, because it's going to be a slower burn, but the ask will be, the connections are deeper and the ask will be much larger.
Yeah.
Right. So this is why it's not surprising when Ezra or Andrew, like I get it. I see that. Right. So I think you already have the answer. It's more just, and we don't have to keep this in. It's just like, I think you'll 10x, and I think you'll solve all of that when you just apply the skills that you already have without the distraction. Yeah.
Well, like super nerdy in the weed.
Yeah.
Do you look at like themes and say, okay, we should
about,
spend
like, addressable markets.
Yeah.
Or like I should spend a quarter of my time doing this type of stuff. I should spend 50% of my time doing this type, and therefore Tuesdays I'm posting blank, Wednesdays and Thursdays I'm do you get that specific? Okay, cool.
Absolutely. So if I'm going to do a programming schedule with you, I'm like, okay, cool. So there's 7 days in a week. All right. So let's just start with a KPI of a video a day, right?
Yep.
Cool. What are the addressable markets that Tim can reach? There's an addressable market where, we're getting father and family.
Yep.
There's an addressable market where people just want to know what working in corporate America looks like.
Yep.
There's an addressable market what living in New York looks like.
Yep.
Okay, great. You also have sneakers, right? Okay, cool. So like, whether it's you literally being on sneaker shopping with Joe LaPuma or whatever it might be, it's like we plan for all of that, right?
Yeah.
And then how can you put certain things on certain days and then leave in? We even try to leave in the serendipity. So like Thursday might be a reply.
Yeah.
Tuesday might be but it's by design, right?
Yep.
Because otherwise, if you don't have, I mean, these are our questions for you actually, but like it feels like you're really good at the scale of production, right? Because that's the biggest challenge.
And
for
I
those
think
people.
your job right now, the corporate job of you scaling the small business advertisement program, it makes perfect sense on how you scale your vlog production.
Yeah.
And I guess my question to you is like, what is the holdup? I guess what's the delta for you to just make this into your thing?
On the record, the delta is making those small steps so that I know how much Cobra costs, and like some of the things is literally fantastic. Just the mechanics of getting to a place where it's like, cool, here we go. It's like somewhere in between building the right off-ramp and building a boat, which is something I heard Noah Kahn say the other day in regards to like, that's kind of a, analogy for life plans, etc. But, I think I've done all the math. I've set up the LLC. I planned out the rest of the year relative to like getting my kid back into the school that I pay for and all that kind of good stuff. Started to tee up at a high level this with my boss, like literally my last one-on-one with him. I like one of the bullet points is I send him an agenda every morning at 4:30 in the morning to be like, these are the things I'd like to talk about today. And one of them was exit strategy. Luckily, we have such a strong dynamic that we can have an engaging conversation about, all right, what do you think that looks like? And instead of being like, oh, fuck you, you're out. So like, don't care about your thoughts. It's like, let's have that conversation. So I built, and it's actually really fun in the corporate space to build take your name out of a box and play fantasy football and be like, cool, this is what makes the most sense.
Fantastic.
Here's what my logic is behind this. Teed it up with my counterparts a couple weeks ago, specifically put it up on a huge screen this week to be like, here's your new org structure without me.
I'm very excited for you. I mean, to continue on Noah's boat analogy, I mean, you're going to win once that's essentially, we talk about all the time. You're burning your sails. There's no turning back, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's when things are really, really going to unlock for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Not that they haven't already, but I think you're going to see the exponential part of it where you're like, oh, wow. Like there's literally a singular focus now to be able to drive. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Do you guys want to just keep talking?
Yeah, we could chat. Yeah. I know you got to.
I got to dip.
You got to go pick up kids.
I know that drill.
So what else is going on, man?
Dude, I mean, to think about how much has happened since the first time we sat down.
When was it? Was it 2022?
I think it was 22. And I remember it was cold, so it was like spring-ish. So we're like, I think we're coming up on
jacket,
and the world was kind of a different place overall for a multitude of reasons. I mean, I can imagine there's been a lot of change for you as well, and obviously growth, and and the one question I didn't get to ask when it was the three of us sitting at the table is, you seem to have cracked the code on brand longevity.
Okay.
Right? Deal with honest. Like the association there is just like the gift that keeps on giving, seemingly.
Yeah.
Like, is it fair to assume that your passion for the space overall and your just kind of consistency of presence plus just having a brand that understands you, is that kind of what that magic recipe is?
I think that relationship sparked before. So I think with any relationship, it's an exchange, right? And I think that exchange was, and so it's two things. One is exchange. The other thing is at the end of the day, whether it's a brand deal or not, it's human relationships. And I think luckily I have stakeholders in the company who have had great experience with me, as I would like to hope. And I've had great experiences with them. And this kind of sparked before this value exchange of ad hoc creator endorsing a product. So I was, I have a retail store that I have been working with as a retailer on the buying side from 2018.
Wow.
And that relationship evolved into us working together on activations and different projects before On became this global brand that it is now, right? Even before they went public, which was in 2021. So being early on a brand, I think definitely helped. Having stakeholders in the company that genuinely likes you helps. And also because they have shown me so much love, I endorse them, not as if necessarily a monetary exchange, but I just genuinely believe in the brand as well.
Yeah, like a fan for life kind of vibe.
Basically, man. I mean, we'll see what happens, you know, but it's not like I got it on tatted on my sleeve or anything. But you know, I consider the brand as a valuable friend, you know, and they've shown me a lot of love throughout that process. And whenever I go into a relationship with any brand, I try to look for that kinship. You know what I mean? So,
1,000%.
like, I mean, again, like if you're going into any sort of a partnership, if you don't want to hang out with that person for a day, like why even do it for a year or multiple years or maybe even for a lifetime? You know what I mean? So, but I do understand that, like, before you get married, you need a date.
Yeah.
You need a flirt. You need to.
Need to learn about each other.
You need to learn about each other. Go grab a few drinks. You know what I mean? And I think in the process, some of the brands that we worked with, during some of those dates, you know, it was very clear that what kind of relationship it was going to be. And I think right now we have a few other brands that hopefully it could turn into other long-term partnerships. But when I go into any sort of a situation, we try to look at it the full picture. So, okay, if this is through an agency, okay, you know what the agent's intentions are, which is going to be fundamentally different than what the brand stakeholders' intentions are. And if it's a legacy brand that is under, let's say, a Procter & Gamble or, you know, a major corporate brand like one of them, like Coca-Cola, for instance. I mean, these brands have been around for so long, and it's such a big, you know, global presence that having you in the picture, like what role do you play? You know, it's like, are you, you know, basically a little cell in a sea of different planktons, or are you a real player in this small cipher of trusted individuals that believe in what you're doing? And I think that's also like understanding the positioning of what kind of value add that you're bringing to the table is also very important. So, like, I think it'll be, it probably is super enticing to get that global brand recognition. You get to collab with them, but if it's something that you could tell, like, okay, I see this as an ad hoc, one-time value exchange, then that's what it is, which is completely fine. But, you know, I think we always try to go and look for opportunities that could be more than that. Yeah. And if it's something that, you know, because again, the relationship part is that, right? Because relationships are subtle, you know, like it's not something that is only quantifiable through money. Because these are humans at the end of the day. You know, there's like love languages that get involved, you know, how they perceive respect. You know, I mean, you're a fan of movies. You know, in City Hall, that movie with Al Pacino, I don't know if you recall, there's a scene where he talks about Menschkeits. Like, what does it mean to be a mensch? Like this thing of respect, you know, and there's that level of fluency that I think is also sometimes necessary when dealing with relationships. So I think that's the whole package. So I think luckily, knock on wood, we continuously retain that relationship, has been very generous.
It also seems super organic too. Like there's something from a familiarity perspective that makes me think of them inherently, especially when you're doing running content. That just feels very normal, but in that right way where it's like a brand just kind of fits in.
Can you tell me the intention behind your question? Are you in conversations with certain brands, or is it, you know, like, are you just actively looking for brand partnerships?
I've been super lucky recently where more stuff than I ever would have fathomed is coming my way.
Right. Give us some examples if you could share.
This is what I'm probably most excited about. The Ad Council. So you know what the Ad Council is? They oversee like most of the bigger PSAs that end up on air across the country, Feeding America, those types of nonprofits. They have an initiative called Tear the Paper Ceiling, which is about the stigma attached to people without bachelor's degrees. And what is their place in corporate America some of the walls that they run into through the application process, some of the walls they run into from a growth process.
Right.
I don't have a college degree.
I see.
So the ability to, and this is something I kept from my parents for 20 plus years. They literally found out through TikTok like 3 months ago.
Oh, you dropped out. That you dropped out.
Yeah. My dad got sick when I was in my second or third year. He had stage 4 melanoma, survived. He was one of 85 people that survived an experimental chemotherapy. It was and I'm an only child, so it was like
it was a tough time for you.
Yeah, it was like I'm there. They try to be like, oh no, you don't have to come home from school. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Or you there's no way I'm not coming home.
Right.
When I went back, a semester and a half had gone by or something like that. I'm like, my perspective on the world has changed first. Second, when my friends are done, I was going to school in Kingston, Ontario, largely because I just loved hockey and loved the little life that I'd built up there at the time. And I was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to stick around here by myself. Back then, this was like 2000, 2001. Virtual classes was literally paper and mailing things in. Yeah. And so I started to take those classes after I came home. But I'm like, this is silly.
Right.
Like, there's nothing. I was studying history, which was amazing, but I'm like, I kind of got the stuff that I want, and I can always learn history. I don't need to take these specific courses to learn history. And so I was just like, cool, now let me run as far away from that thing as possible. So get a job super quick, grow a career so that my parents would never find out, because I knew that they would be like, the fuck? I kind of thought that was part of the agreement. But so coming full circle now, this comes out, finally talk about it, and finally have the conversation with my parents, and I'm in my mid-40s that don't have a college degree, sorry. And ad council's like, we have this thing called tear the paper ceiling. Would you be an advocate for this?
Right.
Like 1,000%. So especially being where I am now, and being able to talk to that eloquently from both sides of the coin, from being in that position, but then
also being in a hiring position.
Exactly. So that's a super small brand deal relative to like compensation, those types of pieces.
In terms of the bag size, but in terms of what it meant for you.
Off the charts.
100%.
Off the charts. Yeah. So that's going to be like my first kind of like longer form thing that's coming in the next 6 weeks or so.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Yeah. Like longer form is in, is it going to be in a short form platform, or is it going to be on YouTube?
I'm going to go for the content arbitrage model, where I'm going to start with a longer form piece, and then chop it up from there into the shorter form things. Yeah.
No, that's great, man. I mean, that's kind of what we put into, I would say, the prestige bucket. So whenever we observe a brand deal, we usually like to look at it from, is it prestige as in signal, something that is meaningful for us? It might be meaningful for a certain group of people. Or is it an audience play, like us doing this partnership where brand deal is going to introduce us to a completely new audience? Or is it a revenue play? Is this something that like basically going to give us a bag, right? Yeah. So it seems like this was somewhere between audience, prestige, and small revenue, but it meant a lot for you because of the fact that this is something that was very meaningful for you, and also it elevates you to your pre-existing audience, but hopefully to a new audience as well, that an identity about a part about you. And this is an additional factor that creates the full picture of who Timm is. Yeah. So I think that's a very, that's something that, I mean, let me ask you this. I mean, at this point, you're probably, like you said, you're getting a lot of deal flow, a lot of inbound opportunities. What are the points that makes you say no to certain opportunities? Like, how do you say no? What are the criteria that allows you to say no?
I'm so fortunate again for the background that takes me to ESPN.
Yeah.
And when we would say no to deals, because started live sports production, next step was marketing at ESPN. So for the integrated platform pieces, so Coors Light Cold Hard Facts, Sunday NFL Countdown presented by IBM, there always had to be some sort of reasonably organic tie.
Okay.
especially for the integrated content pieces.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than an announcer being like, it's now time for your God knows what product, play of the game, and they have to say a tagline.
DuPont
and there's
produced.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. And it's just like, and there's no reasonable connection.
Yeah.
With that in mind, we are all inherently consumers.
Right.
We are dripping in brands right now. We've got brands sitting in front of us like it's everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
Does that thing, because it's likely going to be a thing or a service, obviously, have a reasonable tie into my day-to-day? And if the answer is yes, then it's got a strong shot of being a yes criteria. Overall. Yes. Right. I have to be able to tell a reasonable story. It can't be something that flies in from the clear blue sky.
Right.
It has to be a category that I'm already like deeply engaged with. Obviously, if it's a product that I'm already deeply engaged with, it's a no-brainer. But does it fill a purpose in my world already? Yes or no? Then it becomes relatively clear. And especially if, to your point, you just said it in an eloquent way that I hadn't fathomed before, but it makes all the sense in the world, especially as it relates to potentially opening up new audiences. And then, like, what's the creative challenge? Is there a creative challenge? Is it just like, hey, check these boxes by saying these things? Or is there an opportunity to do this better than anybody else could or might think about doing it?
Yeah.
Because there's a reason why people still love some commercials.
Totally.
They're just done differently. They've got a different sense of humor to it. It's got a different angle to it. So it's like, is it an inherent piece? Could it be reasonably an inherent piece of my world? Is there something that's like at least of some kind of benefit that would either make the audience feel like they're welcome into it or expand that audience? And then, what might be there from a creative leverage perspective that would make me feel comfortable of like, cool, if y'all are saying like, hey, we came here because of what you already brought to the table, right? Like that's a gift. Mm-hmm. And then how can I convince them? So like Brooks was a great example where, had some fun dialogue going into it, but I had a super specific vision. I'm like, I want to do this tour. I want to get these specific shots for it, but this is going to be focused primarily on what this running route is. Y'all are the beneficiaries of that, and I will call out the things you need me to call out. But if I can have that type of dynamic, and if it's something, again, that's like reasonably organic to my world, then it starts to get a lot of fun.
So, I mean, you stated earlier that you want to make a film, and that is your ultimate passion. Mm-hmm. I mean, essentially what you're building up towards right now is you just doing the touches, right? It's like you working out in the gym, you're putting in the work, you understanding audience development, you understanding storytelling.
1,000%.
Even the example that you gave earlier about how you saw a creator engaging with his fan base. These are all, I mean, at the end of the day, whether you are a creator trying to reach a certain milestone or a statesman trying to convince people to vote for you, it's all campaigns, right? And you are in one of the earlier stages of your campaign right now. Like, I guess we asked you earlier about your 10-year goal. You kind of disclosed to us a little bit about your 1-year goal.
Yep.
I mean, when that time comes, that this does become your thing.
Yep.
The business of Timm is the business.
Yep.
What are some of the immediate plans that you want to execute on?
I want to immediately execute on unlocking my ability to help individuals, especially in an early management stage of their career, and companies holistically reinvent their cultures. To me, there is such a massive need in that space in corporate America right now.
Explain that. What are the needs?
The needs are, I'm going to turn my answer around slightly. You're familiar with the broken windows theory?
Yeah.
There is a broken windows thing happening in corporate America relative to mental health.
Right.
The broken windows being the passive aggressive bullshit on a day in and day out basis, people potentially undercutting other people because they're nervous about, well, this is my job, this is my swim lane. the territorialism that comes with that.
Yeah.
And it's these like minor infractions, but they're happening on a pretty consistent basis. It's just inherent in corporate America. It's why there's all that bad content out there about like, shutting down at 5 o'clock on the dot because you don't want to have that person that then like, there's tons of creators that just like dive into making humor out of where there's real issues and people just behaving badly, even if it's not massive infractions. It's that broken windows. Like this is kind of like the first potential sign if you go down that logic train. How do you stop that? Because it has to. Like that's the stuff. How do you
stop that?
It's this because it's the stuff that leads to somebody having a bad day.
Yeah.
They go home frustrated.
Yeah.
They're not as engaged with their family. Maybe they drink a little too much that night, right?
Maybe they start gambling more now.
Or like even as a low hanging fruit, if they're not taking as good of care of themselves as they could be.
Yep.
I'm not going to go for that run because I'm too stressed out because of X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
And it all stems from how people are engaging with each other in the workspace. For a lot of people, there's like 30 million people in corporate America. It's a big issue. There are simple things that can be done on a company by company, even department by department basis that can reconfigure the way that people approach the space and each other. Okay. That ultimately is going to unlock greater business potential as well.
Right.
One specific example, because this is what I would like to unlock at scale and would be one of the first things of like, cool, business of Timm, it's, as you probably are familiar with the phrase, how do you lean into your unfair advantage? Right? Like what is the thing that makes you unique as an individual?
What's the special sauce?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Mine is this mix of my Spicoli side of the brain with the corporate side of my brain and being able to, in some cases, not all cases, eloquently describe what that is to get people to be like, oh, cool, that's a light bulb moment for me. Appreciating the effort behind the ask. In a corporate environment, that doesn't happen nearly as much as it should. So if I understand that ASAP is a bullshit thing to be like, yo, I need this ASAP, do you even know what you're asking for? Do you understand the stress that might put the other person under? If you understand and appreciate the effort behind the ask, then I'm smart and be like, I've got this thing in 3 days. I think you need about 2 days to do this. If you give me this piece and I can put that with this and I can make a more compelling business case for X, Y, or Z. Versus having all of these conversations and all of this passive aggressive behavior just lead to people feeling isolated and like, yes, I have to have a hard cutoff between work and life because that's just the easiest way for me to exist because there doesn't seem like there's enough appreciation for my space, what I bring to the table, like all of those things.
That becomes super transactional and it actually hurts the company.
Exactly. Because if you can have an environment where people are more comfortable being themselves and having an understanding as to who is around them, you're teaching people how to be conductors in symphonies. If you understand what the string section is capable of, you're not going to go ask them for something that is completely supposed to be with the drums, right? And then you can be like, cool, give me a little bit of this, give me a little bit of that. These are not unreasonable asks because I have at least a broad understanding of what the finance department and the marketing department or these people on my teams bring to the table. And then you can actually like bring it together. So whether that's an individual project or like an entire company and whatever your, annual goals may or may not be. And it's a tough space because I don't think today's, at least, this is a very broad statement, but I don't think a lot of today's HR departments are equipped to deal with this, especially with younger generations, and to change that conversation. And sometimes, too, the business of Timm could be going to what I've had to do in some cases over the past 10 years, which is like, just cut to the chase and paint a clear picture of like, we got two choices here. We can choose to be divisive in what is this super small world. I used to do this thing where I would draw a line on a piece of paper when someone came in and be like, hey, we're having this argument with this department again, blah, 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 blah. And I once drew this line. This was like the most annoying boss thing to do. And like one end of the line was like family and friends. And the other end of the line, this is 2017. The other end of the line was ISIS. I'm like, as far as global conflicts go, and as far as like what is happening on the planet right now, and like where enemies are and where like things just exist,
Right.
you understand that what you're talking about consternation wise is all the way over here.
Macro picture,
right?
As you should.
Well, because when people come in and they're like wound up to a 9.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you got to take a deep breath first and foremost. Like, how do I alleviate? And sometimes I have to go to that somewhat jarring realization of like, this is just work.
Yeah.
So that's why you should both be okay with thinking through it. In addition to whatever thoughts you want to have about like closing your laptop and going home at 5, because this is just work.
Yeah.
But give yourself the peace of mind of that too.
Yeah.
You are doing damage to your constitution by letting it build up this way.
Yeah.
So that business of Timm is going to be in that space. And this is the last thing I'll say on it. There are 10,000 people that are going to change the world remarkably over the next 30 years.
Right.
Those 10,000 people are most likely, in my humble opinion, the top 20 people at the Fortune 500 companies.
Okay.
The next generations that are going to get into those chairs can impact wage gaps, environmental policy, healthcare, all of these things that have governments, especially ours, stagnant and perplexed. If Coca-Cola tomorrow is like, yo, our new minimum wage is $150 an hour, they can do it.
They could.
If they're like, hey, we're never going to make another product that isn't immediately biodegradable within 30 seconds of hitting blah, 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 they could figure out and do it.
Yeah.
When you try to rely on a governing body to go to a company to implement a law that they then have to then impact, it's like the chain of impact becomes massive, even if you're just adding in one more variable.
100%.
Could you imagine the most skeptical, kind, well thought through 25, 30-year-olds right now are like, this is a slow race to the top, because when we are in charge, this is the way it's going to go down. Yeah.
Again, I appreciate the insight, and I appreciate this macro vision that you're envisioning. I'm on a very similar path that I think advocacy and being very boisterous, loud is important to get the attention, but the actual institutional change has to come from within.
Totally.
And I agree with you on that. And I think that's what you're getting at.
Yep.
I mean, because you have to influence who are going to be the next generation leaders in those positions. And corporate leaders, whether we agree with it or not, do have a significant stake in the society that we live in.
Yep.
You know, Jamie Dimon is paying lobbyists to make certain things happen that impacts our daily lives, you know? So, and I don't want to single out specifically Jamie Dimon, but I just recently read this Robert Wright book, and he was just talking all day about Jamie. So, but yeah, like whether it's him or any other corporate CEO that you mentioned, like I think those people do have that power. So having said that though, like how does Timm fit into this whole picture as a content creator?
I start to make content that helps people become more comfortable with their place in a workforce.
Right.
Become more understanding of the power long-term that they can potentially create for good, right? The impact that they can have. You don't think when you're a manager like, cool, when I become boss, I can spend after hours going through P&Ls to find places so that merit increases can go from this percentage to that percentage.
Right.
Like you don't contemplate those things. You just kind of see, but like that's, and it scales up more and more and more. So by creating content that it's going to be like where Mr. Rogers meets corporate America to a certain extent.
No, that's a perfect prompt.
I see
great,
I see this, like I gotta, see a drone shot coming down my street and I flip up on the window. I'm like, hey, what's going on, guys? Today we're going to talk about how to write the most well-crafted email to meet somebody else where they are and get shit done.
100%.
And so I think
we're going to talk about what SOP means.
Yeah. And so getting those things, and one of the earliest pieces I did, I was like, if anybody wants a tip out there, like if you can run a P&L, you can run anything.
Yeah.
And I remember people being like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And probably scrolled. But
it's like these are also the type of stuff that I'm kind of curious, why aren't they taught in the school systems? right?
I mean, I'm sure there's some business classes somewhere that do this stuff,
that,
but like to your point, there's
I wish
basics,
I learned that in high school.
Right? And it's remarkable. Again, no college degree, sucked at math. When I say sucked at math, I sucked at math.
Right.
I can run a $30 million P&L really, really, really well within like 0.5% of forecast on a quarterly basis under some of the most corporate, overhanging rules and regulations on the planet. And that's a skill that can be taught. 100%. And it's just like looking at things in a different way. But first and foremost, it's about understanding the opportunity within that versus like, oh my God, if because people have the perception, if I go further up the chain or if I do this or do that, like I'm going to go nuts if I'm staring at Excel spreadsheets all the time.
Right.
But if those Excel spreadsheets are filled with people's names and the opportunity to do good so that they have a better day-to-day so that they're more comfortable and confident to go home and say today was a good day, that's going to impact how well the company runs, how well the department runs, etc.
Adding actual value to the role that you are partaking in.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Because, I mean, if you're just looking at Excel spreadsheets and you're just crunching numbers, and there's no necessary meaning behind that activity, you're just going to look at it as a job.
Right.
Performance is going to suffer.
Yep.
And the actual societal impact as a whole. Yep. Because what you said earlier, it compounds.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like what's that daisy chain?
It's gonna look fucking whack for everybody.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
I got you. That's dope though. But I felt like that Mr. Rogers example is a gem because I do think about that too, man. It's like, why can't we have Sesame Street or Sesame Street equivalent where we, teach kids about assets and liabilities at a young age. Yeah. Teach kids about corporate financing and just a better understanding of how, because like I sucked at math too. I mean, minus the stereotype, I was the Asian kid in the smart Asian math classes that failed all those classes. I was like the kid getting F in pre-cal. And I think I run a decent business. It doesn't affect anything that I do. I'm able to pay taxes on time. So these are the skill sets I think wish it was imparted on us at a younger age, at a better time. And if that could be done through content from a trusted voice, I think that would be super meaningful. Yeah. No, I plan on disrupting the LinkedIn space in a fun way. I'll probably blackball myself from corporate America, but that's when you really burn the sales. I mean, that's kind of what me and Brian talk about. Yeah. Like we talk about a lot of stuff that might ruffle the feathers. Yep. And without that type of just not giving a fuck attitude, it's really challenging to build that real connection. Yeah. And that's kind of what we attempt to do in the food industry, just talking very candidly about how the influencer economy in the food industry works. Yep. And I mean, essentially that's what you're trying to do. Yeah. With the corporate space. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And make it fun, make it digestible, make it something that people want to gravitate towards. And yeah. And we got like a few more minutes left, but is there anything else that we could do to help? Oh man. Keep being cool with your time and responsive as you've been and as kind as you've been throughout, our paths initially crossing. As I'm sure you can attest, friendship in this space is one of the most precious things that any of us can have. Right. So I would say keep being you, man. That's my final ask. That's very nice of you, man. Appreciate you for saying that. Yeah, but we're always accessible. But yeah, I really say that. I really mean it. Like we're an open book. Yeah. So if you ever, shoot the shit and just, hit us up for any questions, feel free to holler at us.